It is really a very wonderful privilege this morning to introduce our speaker this morning, Pierre Boivin, who is who's a partner and national leader of the Africa Group and the Quebec leader of the Global Mining Metals Group at McCarthy Tetrault, one of the leading law firms in Canada, and indeed our host for this entire program of Africa Accelerating 2021. He's going to tell us a bit more about his own life interest, how he got interested in Africa. Oftentimes, when we meet someone who is a leading banker or a leading lawyer, or even a leading politician, or whatever field, we often do not understand the genesis of their story. Sometimes it was a conversation in a taxi that triggered in them a passion. One day I would love to interview Elon Musk and ask him what triggered his interest in technology, what triggered his interest in creating the things he's created. Oftentimes when someone becomes successful, we see the end product. It's like a tree. We see the big oak tree, but we don't see the small seed that became that tree. And today we really are privileged because Pierre, who has been recognized globally as one of the leading lawyers in the world, and by Chambers Global as the leading lawyer in the area of the only Canadian actually listed in Chambers Global as a leading lawyer in the area of mining, international and cross-border Africa transactions. To give us a bit more of a segue into how he became interested in Africa, what is the foundation of his interest in Africa? Because I think that as we discuss transactions, we discuss investments in Africa, we discuss the development of Africa, we can't divorce it from how people got into the Africa space. And once you hear his story, a story which he has told myself and many others in private, you would understand that Canada could not have a better son, and Quebec could not produce a better person, and McCarthy Tetrault could not have a better ambassador than Pierre Boivin in this. So, Pierre, merci so much. Thank you so much for this morning, and please, the stage is yours. Thank you.
I want to thank Sébastien for his overly generous introduction. Alors, bonjour à tous ce matin. C'est un plaisir d'être parmi vous aujourd'hui. Et compte tenu qu'il s'agit d'un événement anglophone, je vais continuer ma présentation en anglais. Distinguished speakers and guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'll continue this presentation in English. Whereas other speakers were asked to address specific important subjects, Gareth has asked me to speak about my own journey, my own personal journey as far as being involved in Africa, as well as my firm's involvement. So this is a first for me, in the sense that although I've been a speaker and moderator many times at many conferences, it was more to address legal or business subjects. This will be a more general and I'd say philosophical presentation. In 1974, when I was a young student in what we call in Quebec a cégep, which is, I guess, the equivalent of first-year college or grade 12. In our literature class, we were asked to read a book called Too Late to Follow Rope, which essentially makes me realize that there was a policy called apartheid that was existing in South Africa. Too Late to Follow Rope was the second novel of Alan Paton, a South African author and an anti-apartheid activist who published a book in 1953. And basically, it depicts the struggle between his position as a police officer and his private conviction that South African laws based on apartheid were immoral. And to give you some context, this is 1974. Well, it's the 1970s. It's the continuation of the 60s peace and love generation, and young men had their hair down to their shoulders, which is, believe it or not, my case at the time. And social justice was a very, very important element. So the realization that apartheid was happening in real time in South Africa was quite a shock for me at the time. I remember having the opportunity later in my first political science course to select a subject for an outline. and I chose to write a paper on the comparison of selective African countries, including South Africa. Needless to say that in Quebec City at the time, I was the only student in my class that was writing about Africa. Later on in 1985, then Prime Minister of Canada, Brian Mulroney, delivered a sweeping condemnation of South Africa's apartheid regime at a United Nations speech. I, like many Canadians, felt mighty proud that Canada was one of the first countries to impose economic sanctions against South Africa. Nelson Mandela, after walking out of prison in February 1990, came to Canada in June of that year as Vice President of the African National Congress. And he addressed a joint session at the House of Commons and the Senate. It was the first time in 4 decades that a non-head of state had been given the privilege. Mr. Mandela was always very grateful to the role that Canada had played as a leader of what became, at the time, an international movement of countries who imposed economic sanctions against South Africa and which contributed to the change of regime. Many years later, after I joined McCarthy, Tetro, the firm decided to increase their international involvement. On the basis of transactions that I had been doing in Africa, I suggested that we create a national group focused on projects in Africa. Since then, we have had an active practice and I've had the opportunity to work in many African countries. And actually, I think my firm has been involved in more than 30 countries in Africa on various transactions and deals. Of course, there are risks in doing business in Africa, just like there are risks in doing business internationally, generally. Personally, I can speak to this, as I was caught in the middle of a terrorist attack at the Radisson Blu Hotel in Bamako, Mali, 6 years in November this year. Approximately 20 people were killed and almost as many were injured. At the end of the day, I was evacuated from a rooftop by Army Special Forces and consider myself very lucky to be alive. But actually, this could have happened just about anywhere in the world, as unfortunately terrorism is a world problem. For example, Paris had unfortunately been the subject of an even deadlier attack the week before. A few months later, I traveled back to West Africa for business and have been involved in transactions since. As I'm addressing a sophisticated audience today, I certainly do not have to go through the merits of why a country like Canada should be investing in projects in Africa. But for the benefit of some Canadian players in the audience that are considering doing business in Africa for the first time, let me mention a few elements. There has been a lot written about the rising Africa. A great example is McKinsey, who wrote Lines on the Move in 2010 and Lines on the Move #2 in 2016. Still today, excellent documents on doing business in Africa and why everybody should be considering investment in the continent. More recently, as indicated yesterday morning by Mr. Goldie Hyder, President and CEO of the Canadian Business Council, they published in February 2020 an excellent document entitled Why Africa? Building Canada's Economic Ties to the world's fastest growing continent, which also offers a compelling analysis. More recently, an organization called the Canadian Africa Growth Coalition, working with Ottawa-based Crestview Strategy, has written a document entitled The Need for a Strong Canada Sub-Saharan Africa Partnership, which also outlines the opportunities that exist. I'll obviously be very happy to provide the references to those documents to anyone interested in reading on the subject. There are therefore many compelling reasons for Canadian companies to be investing in Africa, to which I can emphasize an often underestimated element. Canada is bilingual, and French and English speaking country, which means that we obviously can speak the language in a vast majority of the countries in Africa. Also, the Canadian brand, which we often underestimate, is extremely well respected by Africans. There are actually many industries in which we have an expertise that are a natural fit for involvement in Africa, including mining, oil and gas, energy, agribusiness, clean tech, and telecommunications, to name just a few. With regard to financing and contractual relationships, Export Development Canada, ADC, which I have the pleasure of being on the board of, and the Canada Commercial Corporation, CCC, are agencies of the federal government that can facilitate a company's involvement. Also, as mentioned by Prime Minister Trudeau yesterday, the federal government has, over the recent years, negotiated some bilateral international treaties with several African countries that provide additional investment protection. More recently, the Canadian government has accentuated its involvement via various trade missions, which notably involve Governor General Julie Payette, Mary Ng, Minister of Small Business, Export, Promotion and International Trade, which we congratulate again because her nomination was again confirmed yesterday with the new cabinet, and Prime Minister Trudeau himself. These visits, I must say, are very much appreciated by the private sector, who feels supported when Canadian politicians travel to Africa. There are also senior officers at Global Affairs Canada who do a wonderful job of promoting and supporting Canadian companies, and I will take the opportunity to salute Paula Caldwell-Saint-Onge, who will be moderating the next panel and who recently retired from GAC, and who did a great job as Director General for Africa, as well as Tariq Khan, who is the new Director General for Africa and who will be speaking, I believe, tomorrow. Another key player is the Trade Commissioner Service that is working through the Canadian embassies and then do an incredible job of supporting Canadian companies. And probably for anybody thinking of doing business in Africa for the first time, that's probably the first call you want to make. With regard to positive recent developments on the financial side, let me mention the creation in January 2018 of Canada's first development financial institution, FinDev Canada, which I also have the pleasure to be on the board of, and which is a wholly owned subsidiary of EDC. The Government of Canada invested $300 million initially in FinDev, with more funds to come. FinDev's mission is aimed exclusively at impact investment in Africa and Latin America and the Caribbean. Also, Investissement Québec, a subsidiary of the Quebec government, is currently putting in place a $50 million fund aimed at Quebec-based companies who are investing in Africa. So there are tools available to accompany Canadian companies. But to quote from the Business Council of Canada report, during the period between 2001 and 2018, Canada more than tripled its exports to Africa from US $1 billion in 2001 to US $3.3 billion in 2018. However, Canada captured less than 1% of the additional global exports to Africa that were realized in this period. We can therefore do much more, especially in a context where diversification from US and Chinese markets is being sought. As many others do, I believe that developing a comprehensive Canada-Africa strategy by the government would go a long ways to bridge the trade gap. As previously mentioned, Mr. Trudeau's government has shown some very encouraging signs, and we hope that a call by several stakeholders to a more cohesive approach to Canadian involvement in Africa will be heard. Such a policy would certainly contribute to a more integrated Team Canada approach, a team approach which has been successfully adopted by other countries. Finally, as advice to newcomers transacting in Africa for the first time, let me quote from my good friend Benoit Lassalle, pioneer in investment in Africa based in Quebec, who has been involved for over 30 years and was currently CEO of SRG Graphite and Aya Gold and Silver. He used to say, there are 4 P's that are required for success in the international market: patience, politeness, perseverance, and passion. Gareth has also asked me to mention if there was a particular trend that I would want to briefly comment on. The obvious one is actually one of the main themes today, which comes under the heading of environmental and socio-economic well-being, and which is sometimes commonly referred to as ESG. Many speakers will be discussing this today, amongst them my friends Paula Caldwell, Siri Jenick, and Neil Reeder, on various panels that you will not want to miss. As enterprises look into environmental and social involvement, what I'm hoping to see as a trend would be a larger involvement by Canadian financial institutions and pension funds, which may possibly have to incorporate some ESG or impact investments into their portfolios. I believe that these financial organizations may have to move away from strictly providing the best possible return on investment for their shareholders, but also making room for investments that will have an impact in contributing to create a better world. What one can expect is that this new investment approach will have a lot of arrows that will be pointing in the direction of Africa, as, for example, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals include elements such as no poverty, gender equality, climate action, affordable and clean energy, reduce inequality, clean water and sanitation. They will obviously all apply to Africa. Therefore, this new investment trend should bring about involvement by large Canadian financial players, which together with the African Free Trade Agreement are all promising aspects, which makes an optimist like me believe that although much has been done, the best is yet to come. As they say in West Africa, nous sommes ensemble, which translates into we are together. In closing, I want to salute the work done by two organizations, the Canada-Africa Council, of which I was vice chair for many years, and also the Canada-Africa Chamber of Business, notably for organizing Africa Accelerating, but also all kinds of other events. I just want to mention there's a lot of volunteer work that goes into these organizations, and I want to thank the people that are involved. I am confident that a three-day conference such as this will contribute to bringing the Canada-Africa business relationships where it should be to the next level. Je vous remercie pour votre attention et bonne continuation. I thank you very much for your kind attention and hope that you will enjoy the remainder of the conference. Thank you. Merci.